Welcome to the Grounded podcast with your host, Dr. Iman. This is a space where the intellectual meets the spiritual. I'm a professor, scholar of religion, and someone trying to find her footing. Together, we'll seek clarity not in passivity or bypassing, but in intuition, critique, and imagination. Some episodes are just me, reflecting on where I'm finding my footing. Others draw more closely from my own research on religion and spirituality, tracing where I've seen others find theirs. And sometimes we're joined by experts, friends, and even you, the listeners, learning with each other and seeking rootedness together. So wherever this episode takes us, I'm really glad you're here. Let's get grounded. Hello listeners, it is your host Iman, and today I'm feeling particularly grounded in the fact that everything is actually that deep. For those of you who have been listening and who know me, you know that this is my first semester as an assistant professor of religious studies at Spelman College, and I am coming off of my first experience of the Founders Day convocation ceremony, which I would say was something like a mini graduation, and it included all of the faculty in their full regalia, all of the seniors in their caps and gowns, and then freshmen wearing all white. And while I would say that normally a typical graduation ceremony focuses specifically on celebrating the senior class, I felt that the point of this particular ceremony was understanding that these particular graduates in this moment in 2026 are carrying on an ancestral legacy, something that goes much deeper than the present moment, something that extends into the past, but also is reaching towards the future graduating class. And, I am a Black Muslim, so I can count on very few hands the kind of Black church experiences that I have. And this certainly was a Black church experience. But during the whole ceremony, I was just so overwhelmed and overtaken at just how emotional and evocative every part of the ceremony was, from the hymns to the singing to the performances to the fact that they celebrated not just this graduating class, but honored it and gave an honorary degree to somebody who graduated in 1968 and other folks who have worked at the institution for decades. And so it was just this moment of recognizing and calling upon the deeper purpose of what it means to be Black women in pursuit of knowledge and carrying on an ancestral legacy to be knowledge bearers. And as I'm sitting here being a part of this ceremony for the first time, it feeling like a different kind of religious experience than that of what I am used to, because it did feel very Black church. But what also felt deeply familiar was understanding how deep and emotional the pursuit of intellectualism is, and how deeply spiritual it is at the same time, especially within these borders, especially as descendants of enslaved people brought over here as cargo, trafficked, to then make a commitment to your intellectualism and knowing that that pursuit of your intellectualism is also deeply spiritual. And I was sitting there, right, watching folks be brought to tears, watching the joy on the student's face, the joy on the guest's face, the joy on the faculty member's face, as we were all celebrating this moment, celebrating them, but also celebrating the ancestors who came before them and the future generations to come. And I am thinking, oh my gosh, this is all just so deep. Deeper than this present moment, deeper than our own individual lifetimes. And it made me think about the phrase that I have been told very many times in my life by many people, which is when I bring something up or try to add a certain kind of complexity to the conversation, a certain kind of intellectualism to the conversation, a certain kind of spirituality to the conversation, being met with folks who say, it's not that deep. And I feel like that's a phrase that is also particularly directed at Black women. It feels like gender-coded language for you're being dramatic. And it's never a means of actually trying to intellectually gauge or understanding what the other person is saying, what I am saying. It is simply a dismissal. And I've always been so frustrated by that, because it has always felt so much more than just refusing to engage with someone. It's also denying of the spiritual depths of everything that we do. That actually the whole point of human existence is feeling things deeply, is intellectualizing things deeply, is being able to have a deeper sense of what is going on beyond just simply the material or the present moment. So I was just sitting in that chapel feeling so vindicated that when you are somebody who has been frequently dismissed or has had to be confronted by somebody saying, oh, it is not that deep, that there are just as many spaces, places, and times where you're going to be in where you realize that the depth of what you are experiencing actually goes beyond words, which I feel is a perfect segue to our organizing question of the day, which is actually a listener question that comes from my dear friend Salome, who asked me, what do Muslims mean when they say, I fear no one but Allah? And this is a really topical question because I have actually been seeing this phrase, I fear no one but Allah, circulate a lot on social media as it relates to the genocide in Palestine, as it relates to the war in Iran, and all of the kind of imperial violence and devastation that we are seeing there is this frequent resurgence amongst Muslims worldwide. And my particular kind of scope is Muslims in the US or Muslims in North America who are posting this I fear no one but Allah as a response to the imperial and state violence that we are witnessing from the West in places like Iran, in places like Lebanon, and in places like Palestine. So what do Muslims mean when they say, I fear no one but Allah? Now, as you all know, I am an intellectual historian of Black religion, particularly Black women's religious history. And this phrase, I fear no one but Allah, has actually been instrumental to Black Muslima thought and intellectualism within the United States, which is my area of expertise. And so I want to talk about two thinkers whose responses to this question shed so much light on what Muslims, particularly Black women, have meant when they say, I fear no one but Allah. And those two thinkers are Safiya Bukhari and Dr. Amina Wadud. And the answer that these two thinkers bring to us when we ask, what does it mean when a Muslim says, I fear no one but Allah? It means not just a belief, it is an action, and it is being spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally unable to take injustice, tyranny, and exploitation sitting down. In Black Muslima history, it has been a rallying call, an articulation of being Muslim that extends beyond just belief and enters into the realm of action and doing and working against, fighting against, thinking against, and imagining beyond. So let's turn to the Black revolutionary thinker, the Black Liberation Army veteran, and the Black Panther veteran, Safiya Bukhari. I got to spend so much time in Ramadan talking about Safiya Bukhari and talking about her understanding of Islam and revolution, particularly Black revolution within the United States, as being compatible and as being, as she put it, not a contradiction. And so I feel like getting this question even a couple weeks after Ramadan is just showing me that Sister Safiya is begging to be talked about in this moment. I feel like this question I could not answer without evoking her again, which just to me, feels like she wants to be present here in this conversation and in this particular moment right now. So who was Safiya Bukhari, and what does she teach us about what Muslims mean when they say they fear no one but Allah? She was born Bernice Jones in 1950 in New York, and she ended up volunteering with the Black Panther Party's Free Breakfast for Children program when she was 18 with her college sorority. So she was actually exposed to Panther politics through this volunteering, but that was not the catalyst to her actually becoming a Panther herself. It wasn't until she was walking in 1969, I believe through Times Square with a friend, and she noticed that a member of the Panther Party was being harassed by the NYPD for selling newspapers and passing out information on the street. And so he was being harassed, and Safiya intervened and told the police officer that he was violating that Panther member's First Amendment, and she was then subsequently arrested for inciting a riot. And she talked about how the violence and the treatment that she experienced during this had led her to a lifelong commitment of ensuring that she or no one else she would knew would be treated like a second-class citizen in the way that she, her friend, and that Panther had been treated in that moment. So she went home after being arrested, told her parents what happened, and told them that she was also joining the Black Panther Party. And 2 years later, by 1971, she is heading the Harlem office of the Black Panther Party. She is serving in the top role in terms of being in charge of information and communication. She is the point person that is connecting the Panthers above ground with the Panthers underground, who were then a part of the Black Liberation Army. And she's heading the Harlem office after the Panther split in 1971. She is also the intermediary between all allied organizations and community members in Harlem at that time. So many aspects of the Panther Party and their organizing and what they are doing at that time in New York City are running through her, and that she is a bridge person to all of it. And during this time, she had also started the National Committee to Defend Political Prisoners, which was a who were committed to liberating Panthers who had been imprisoned and who they considered political prisoners and prisoners of war for their work with the Black Panther Party. Because at this time, the FBI, federal agents, and state agents are charging Panthers with bogus crimes and keeping them for trial and imprisoned for longer than they had kept any other people in history imprisoned during this time. So Safiyah was working to liberate her comrades who had been imprisoned for their work. And it was her work to organize and liberate her comrades that had placed her on the FBI's radar and led her by 1973 to be labeled the #1 Black militant by the FBI and become a COINTELPRO target. I am going to put a link to a really good book that has photos and images of FBI COINTELPRO documents, and COINTELPRO stands for counterintelligence. For those of you who are interested in learning about just how deep, just how violent, just how evil, and just how extreme the FBI went to in order to infiltrate, undermine, and ultimately destroy these organizations, target Panthers, kill them, imprison them, and so on, to prevent what they felt would be a Black Messiah rising up amongst these Black power and Black youth organizations. And so while she is a Panther, while she is heading the New York office, she ultimately receives a subpoena from the US government for her to testify against her comrades. And the subpoena also revoked her Fifth Amendment right. So rather than testify against her comrades, she decides to go underground with the Black Liberation Army, which was the underground segment of the Black Panther Party. And while she is underground, traveling south, she ends up being a target of a COINTELPRO setup, which ultimately leads to a shootout in a convenience store in Virginia, the result of which is her being charged with multiple felonies and leading to her subsequent capture and imprisonment in the Virginia Correctional Center for Women in Gotchland, Virginia. And Safiyah enters prison as a Muslim. Safiyah had converted or reverted or returned to Islam through her friend and her mentor, Albert Noah Washington. And this is going to be extremely important for the decisions that she makes during her first few months and first few years in prison. When she arrives and is captured in Gotchland, she was actually traveling south, and it was her plan while she was traveling south to seek medical care for orange-sized fibroid tumors that she had on her ovaries. And when she went to prison doctors to tell her about her health condition, they told her to come back in 10 years when her condition had worsened. It only took 1 additional year for her condition to worsen and for her to begin to hemorrhage from the bleeding of the fibroid tumors. And when she went to prison doctors, bleeding profusely, hemorrhaging, they told her to simply rest. And she filed appeals. She did everything she could within the court system, but she was told that what was happening constituted a difference in medical opinion between herself and prison doctors, and they basically refused to give her the care that she needed. And she knew if she were to stay in that prison, she was going to die from these fibroid tumors. So rather than dying, on New Year's Eve 1976, Safiyah escapes prison. And she writes about this escape in her memoir essay, Coming of Age, and in her other, which I would probably say is her second most popular essay, called Islam and Revolution is Not a Contradiction. She writes about her decision to escape from Gotchland on New Year's Eve 1976. And of course, she does not give up the logistic, kind of strategic, people-oriented resources that were needed in order for her to escape. She instead talks about how her escape was aided by a vision that she had received from Allah, who had told her to go as far as she could in her own pursuit to save her life, and that Allah would handle the rest, and gave her a vision of both her escape and that she would return. And so on New Year's Eve 1976, her and another prisoner, they break out of prison, and she ultimately is free for 2 months, where she seeks the medical care that she needs, and then she is recaptured. She is then brought back to Virginia, put on trial, defends herself defends her escape as a life-saving measure. The jury is so convinced and believes her so deeply that they do not want to find her guilty. The judge forces them to find Safiya guilty. They give her only 1 additional year onto her prison sentence, but the most important part is they give her the right to access medical care outside of prison doctors. I just think like, oh my gosh, like how much of a baddie do you have to be? Escape prison and then come back, defend yourself on trial, and ultimately win. Now, to understand just how integral her vision and her 101 conversation with Allah was to her escape, you have to understand what it meant to Safiya Bukhari to be Muslim. For her to be Muslim meant to wage struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found. That is how she defined what it meant to be Muslim. This is a refrain that she repeats in her writing and her work. She also writes that to be Muslim was also to not have fear in anything or anyone other than Allah. And this is going to be instrumental and a huge catalyst to her resistance to state violence, including that of her escape. The deepest window to what actually Safiya meant by this, to have no fear in anyone but Allah, we have to also turn to Safiya Bukhari's parable of the snake. Now, what do I mean? After she is returned from prison, after the prison escape, she is placed under maximum security segregation for, I believe, 3.5 years. And during this time, her biggest fear is not the state. Her biggest fear is that the state will use her biggest fear to intimidate her, to torture her, and make her give up information on her comrades. And what is her biggest fear? It is snakes. So while she is in maximum security segregation, she has a haunting anxiety that snakes are around the corner. And one day that anxiety manifests and comes true when she is being moved from her room to another part of the prison, and she passes by a room and she swears that she sees a snake in the corner of a room and she crashes out. She has a full-blown panic attack. And when she gets back to her room, as she is having this panic attack, as she writes about it in retrospect, is she realizes in that moment, wait, how can I be a Muslim if I fear something other than Allah, if I fear snakes? Because to her, to be a Muslim was to only fear Allah. And by being scared of snakes, she was allowing herself to also be scared of what the state would do to her. So she employs the saying, I fear no one but Allah, to both ease her own anxiety about, her fear, her deep fear of snakes, but also to challenge the authority and the power of the state. Because to be Muslim was to struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found. Safiya Bukhari, the Panthers, understood the US government as waging tyranny and oppression. So for her, to be Muslim meant to not allow the state to be the sole determining force of her life. It was to struggle against state and imperial violence, which she called the beast of American capitalism, imperialism, and sexism. And to fear no one but Allah was to have no fear of what the state could do to her, because she was doing what she needed to as a Muslim. And so there's an amazing book called No God But Man by Atiya Hussein. And she writes about this parable of the snake and writes about what she calls the theological challenge that Black Panthers, Black Power organizations in general, and including the likes of Safiya Bukhari, pose to the state. So she calls these groups as posing a theological challenge to the state. Now, what does that mean? Atiya Hussein is theorizing that the state's theology rests on the idea that man, the perfect man, what she thinks of as like the average man, we won't go too deep into that, but that, the white governing presidential state agent is a god in the theology of the state. And what the Panthers did, what Safiya did, what Black Power did when they said power to the people, when Safiya Bukhari said, I fear no one but Allah, and then escapes from prison, and then also overcomes her fear of snakes, is that they are challenging the idea that power rests in the state, that power rests in white men, in white people, in white supremacy, in the institutions and systems of power that prop it up. So they are fundamentally undermining the religiosity of state government by saying that power exists in the people, in the masses, and not just the few. That power exists in a law, so therefore they must struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found. That power exists in a law, so they must have no fear in anything other than Allah, which will then enable them to do the kind of struggling against state-sponsored tyranny and oppression that they were facing and encountering in their everyday lives in that moment. So when we see contemporary Muslims, post or create art out of or chant at protests, "I fear no one but Allah," that phrase has such a deep rooted history in Black religious history, in Black Muslima history, in Black power history, in Islam in America, as a rallying call to struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found, to use Safiya Bukhari's words. As Atiya Hussein puts it, to pose a theological challenge to the state that says that the state has sole authority to determine your life. So in Black Muslima thought, in Black Muslima intellectual history, it is a reminder that even though the state and systems of power might be the force that determines your material reality, it is one's duty to spiritually, emotionally, physically, organizationally struggle against that material reality if it is oppressive, even if that reality is sanctioned by the state. To fear no one but Allah means that the state does not get to decide my present or future, or the present or futures of my people, in Black Muslim thought in the history of Islam in America. Now, there's another thinker who I think provides a really related and important contribution to this idea of what do Muslims mean when they say they fear no one but Allah. And that is the Dr. Amina Wadud, who is a professor emeritus of Islamic studies, who is probably the most popular, well-known Muslim theologian living in our time, and who has done incredible work in organizing towards what we recognize today as Islamic feminism. And she is the author of the first woman-centered interpretation of the Quran, and also this book called Inside the Gender Jihad. And her thinking with Islam as a religion that struggles towards gender justice in our contemporary moment has to also do with this idea that Muslims or one should not fear or put anything above Allah, right? Safiya Bukhari is going to give us this as in the state should not be placed above Allah and placed above a Muslim's duty to struggle against tyranny and oppression. And Amina Wadud is also going to help us think about how the phrase "to fear no one but Allah" also gets at like the monotheistic core of what Islam is, particularly as it relates to gender violence and gendered oppression. So in her work, Amina Wadud comes up with a paradigm that is going to shift gender justice and Islamic feminist, and however phrase you want to put it, organizing and thinking in the paradigm that she coins to argue that Islam is fundamentally a religion that is grounded in gender justice and equity of the gender spectrum is this idea of the Tawhidic paradigm. Now, what is the Tawhidic paradigm? Tawhid basically means the divine uniqueness and the divine oneness of God, of Allah. Tawhid is the monotheistic core of Islam. And the intervention that Amina Wadud makes in her work is that when Islam is used to uphold gender hierarchies, it is fundamentally undermining the monotheistic core of Islam. Now, I like to teach this to my students by this visual. What I am doing, and if you're watching this on video, on YouTube, on Instagram, you will see this. And hopefully we have a YouTube by this episode and this week. So what the Tawhidic paradigm says is this. It says that when we are in spaces and places where men have greater authority than women, including ritual authority, like being able to lead prayers, they are fundamentally undermining the monotheistic core of Islam by creating gender hierarchies in a society that look like an upside down triangle, where at the bottom of that triangle is women, and then the two lines that make up the sides of the triangle make it that Allah is on one side and that men are the other, so that Allah and men are on equal fields, meaning that when men are placed above women and given greater religious authority and greater voices than women, they are placed in a godlike status that fundamentally undermines the monotheistic core of Islam by making men godlike. And instead, what she says is that Tawheed, the divine uniqueness, the divine oneness of Allah, means a society organized like a right side up triangle, where Allah is at the top and men and women and all people are on equal playing field. Because putting one above the other would be placing that category of people in a godlike status, which again would undermine the monotheistic core of Islam. So Amina Wadud is inviting us to think about how when we create a society where women have to fear men, we create a society that is not organized around the monotheistic core of Islam, that makes women have to fear men, fear systems of oppression created by men, and then therefore makes them godlike. I'm giving you Amina Wadud's Tawhidic paradigm through this understanding of the Muslim saying of what it means to fear no one but Allah, because that phrase, whether we want to take it in the way that Safiya Bukhari puts it in terms of a more revolutionary, struggling against systems of oppression wherever they may be found, in terms of something that enabled her Black revolutionary activism, her escape from prison, and so on. And if we also want to take that then to Amina Wadud, who is talking about gender justice, we see that this to fear no one but Allah becomes a rallying cry, becomes a theological challenge to systems of oppression. And again, theological challenge being Atiya Hussein's work. But we see how that phrase in Black Muslima history and Black women's religious history has always been a call to not allow systems of power that structure one's material life have the final say on your life, to have the final say on what the future is going to be or what your present could or should look like. So when you see Muslims post, so when a mass injustice happens against Muslims, happens against Black people, happens against people both within these borders and outside of them, like what is happening in Lebanon, like what is happening in Palestine, what Muslims are saying is that spiritually, physically, emotionally, psychologically, that even though this power is creating this mass injustice in this present moment, it is both, one, their duty to understand that that system should not be feared and that there is no power greater than Allah to actually struggle and do things, not just believe that there is no one to fear but Allah, but to also act and move accordingly, to organize accordingly. And with that, I am leaving this kind of run through of two of my favorite Black Muslima thinkers and this crash course on what Muslims mean when they say they fear no one but Allah, particularly through Black Muslima history, as challenging myself to think about how I'm going to struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found, how I'm going to organize my life according to, right side up triangles that see everything on an equal playing field, and not just believe that, but act accordingly, dream accordingly, organize accordingly. And with that, I am leaving this crash course on what it means to fear no one but Allah through US Black Muslima history and intellectual history, actually feeling really tired. I was feeling really energized as I was going through that history, but now that I've come to the end, I'm feeling deeply tired. And I have been told by many that feeling that sense of tiredness after experiencing, such a high and feeling really energetic while you're in the throes of something is a sign that some channeling took place. And in this moment, I'm just feeling also compelled to share that one of the things that I love about Amina Wadud's work, one of the things that I love about Safiya Bukhari's work, particularly how Safiya Bukhari thinks about this idea of revolution, is that she talks about revolution as the small everyday actions, the small everyday commitments, the small everyday things that we do between each other, deciding to love each other and in our everyday lives as being revolutionary, that is the hardest revolution that we go through. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you liked it, please share with a friend. Please also rate and review us on Spotify. You can find me, and please send me your questions. Thank you, Salome, for sending me one in my DMs on Instagram. I'm on Threads now, low key. I'm on TikTok, as I have been, at Iman, ABDK, IMAN, ABDK. And I will see you guys here next Monday. Bye-bye.